Hello, everyone. It's Andrea and Phyllis, and we are super excited to be sharing the social media consulting agreement here with the person who has developed this contract for us, Elizabeth Potts-Weinstein. She's a lawyer and is going to walk us through the contract. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thanks for having me here.
Yeah.
It's great to have you here. Maybe you can tell the story about how you met Elizabeth real quick, Andrea.
I just met her online. I just connected with
Funny
her.
How that works.
Right. That's the power of social media right there. I had seen someone sharing something. She was talking about legal issues and I'm like, you know what, that's important and something I don't know about. So, I've followed her for years and years and now happy to be working with her to kind of work through this contract, which is very important for you as a business and to protect yourself and protect your agreement with the client. So
right. And so just a little bit of history. We had some consulting agreements on the school site for a while, and this is one that we are replacing those with. And so let's go through it. Now, there are some things here on this document that are highlighted. Obviously, those are things that you will need to fill in for yourself. And there are also places that have options. So Elizabeth, we're just going to take it away and start at the very top.
Right. Yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to make sure that there's a place on the top where people have to put their business name. And this is something that sounds super obvious, but I actually wanted to just make a point that people always sign the contract and write the actual name of their business and not just their own personal name. If they happen to have an LLC or a corporation, the name of your business needs to be on the contract, not your own personal name. And you need to be signing the contract on behalf of your LLC or your corporation and not just your own name. And people make this mistake a lot. They'll form an LLC and not sign the contract on behalf of their LLC. So just to make sure that people don't make that mistake.
That's perfect. It's such a basic thing, but it happens all the time.
Yeah.
In section number 1, I want everyone to notice this is called services, where there is a consulting services proposal. That's what you're used to building for the client. You have a proposal, and now you'll have a contract, and they will be combined together when working with a client. So we just wanted to make sure that you understand that in section 1. Anything you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I just have also a question too. When you're delivering this to the client, it's okay to just put these two in an attachment on an email. Is that right, Elizabeth? How do people deliver these kind of as an attachment or whatever?
Physically, yeah, like how you physically do it. Yeah, a lot of my clients, what you'll do is a lot of times you may actually, the proposal might be something you've already done for the client kind of in your marketing and your sales process. And then when you do the contract, when you've actually closed the deal, you literally take this proposal and, well, if you were physically doing this, you would staple it to the contract, but we're not stapling because we're probably doing something online. You'd stick it in the same PDF.
Yeah. Okay.
And I mean, most of the time I do almost all my contracts, actually not almost, I do all my contracts online, and you just literally put it in the same PDF document and then use, EchoSign or Right Signature or whatever you do to have people sign things online.
Great.
That's great.
Great. And let me just also, before we dive a little bit further into this, when is this type of contract appropriate versus maybe you just are doing some kind of consulting where there's not as much kind of duties, maybe it's just, when do you need a contract? What are the best times to have a contract?
It really depends upon what you're doing and your kind of business and how much risk you're willing to take, which, that's a very vague answer.
Yeah.
It's part of the issue when you're doing work for people is there's a couple risks that you have. One risk is, are you going to get paid? So if your people are paying you up front, then there's not as much risk that you're not going to get paid. Now, they could always do a chargeback, so there's that risk there. And if they do a chargeback and you don't have a written contract, it's going to be really hard to go back to PayPal and prove up that they were supposed to pay you, because PayPal isn't. If you have a contract, PayPal will probably take your side versus if you don't have anything. The other thing is that there's the other stuff that we may talk about intellectual property rights or things like that, where if there's nothing written down and you've actually delivered work for your clients, you've been the administrator on their Facebook account, things like that, where you've done things on behalf of your clients, you don't really have any protection. So it depends on what you're doing. If you're just doing a one-off consultation call for someone for 30 minutes and they pay you for that up front, that's not that big of a deal.
Right.
That's very different than if you actually are taking over their Facebook account and you're taking over the Twitter account. There's a lot of risk there on your behalf, and you're posting things on their behalf that are photos that you don't want to be responsible for whether or not they're committing copyright infringement and they get a letter from Getty,
Right.
So that's a very different thing. So just
Right.
having a contract protects you from those kind of risks.
Great. Awesome. Thank you.
That's super.
Yeah.
And moving to the second one under clients' duties, this actually comes up a lot in our world. What happens if the client becomes unresponsive? So you've addressed it in this second paragraph, second section here. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Right. Yeah. And I address this in kind of two different stages. And this isn't the kind of thing that depends on how you structure your work with clients, whether or not the way I structured this is appropriate for you. So I kind of was thinking about all the different ways that people might work with clients. But how I structured this is if your client disappears for 10 days, then everything kind of stops, and then that they may have to pay you more money if they want to reinstate the work. And then if they completely disappear for a month, then the contract is deemed, this agreement is deemed canceled. The idea being that in your proposal, you would have more details about how that works. And the more details would depend upon how you structure things. If you have a client who's paying you $1,000 a month and it's just $1,000 every month because you're managing all their social media, you're going to structure cancellation and all that stuff different than if you have a client who's paying you $6,000 for a 3-month consultation package. Like that will be cancellation and all that will be structured very differently than an ongoing monthly thing. So the details really depends.
And you can edit this part. You can say, to your comfort level, if it's, if you feel like you can go farther, longer or whatever, or you want to make it tighter, right, that can be edited.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing is I was just kind of picking something, the 10 days and 30 days really depends upon what makes sense, and how much money they should pay really depends on how much money they're paying you and what makes sense. I've had clients where it was $150. I had clients where it was 10%. And I've had clients where they actually didn't make them pay any money. And instead they actually just made them go get back in line. And then they had to wait their turn. And because just logistically speaking, right? If someone disappears for a month, you have to relearn all their stuff and maybe you have a full book of clients again. And so, it just depends on your practice.
Yeah. Smart. So in section 3, going along with this same idea about fees, that's very clearly specified in another part of all of this. But inside this contract, it's saying here that the client agrees to pay you these things. And this is the one is if it's late or declined, work will not be performed until the non-payment is rectified. So again, that has some room for a little bit of adjustment, but this is what protects, our social media managers from any problems they might have with this type of payment program with the client.
Yeah.
Right.
Good. Yeah, and then I think the expenses is very, very clear too. Just if there's any advertising expense, we always kind of tell our students that it's a good idea to just have the billing go through their account so you're not responsible for it. That's what we recommend, but definitely make sure that anything like contests or images that you're purchasing are paid for or accounted for in your proposal, right? Is that
right? Yeah, and fundamentally, you just want to make it clear who's paying for what.
Yeah.
However you want to set it up is fine, but you just want it to be clear who's paying for what, and if you are going to pay for things and they're supposed to reimburse you, you want that stated, because not just So, because you don't want to ever have to sue anybody, but you don't want them to be confused, because
Right.
people will be surprised. They think, oh, I thought that X dollars included all those
Yes.
other things, and then they'll be upset because
Yeah.
they didn't realize that it wasn't included. And you probably can't include that because it's just no possible way to include those things.
Right.
So you want to make sure it's very, very clear.
Yeah, and that's section 5 is along those same lines, is what are the things that are being provided by you and what's being provided by the client. So that list of expectation and who does what is really, really important. So that section 5 is that same type of idea, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You just want to be very, very clear. And part of the thing is too, is, we generally say that you're responsible for just, you have your own computer, you have your own regular things because you're not an employee, right? And that's important to say. But anything extraordinary, anything that they need that's custom, they are going to be responsible for it. But you would put that in the proposal. It needs to be specific.
Right. And in section 6, obviously this is when it begins and how it ends, and what's the process for ending it. And section 7, client's intellectual property. This is actually a very important paragraph, I think. Can we go over just a tiny little bit of this?
Sure. So, this is something where the client, generally speaking, they have their intellectual property that they're going to be giving you. So they have their own trademarks. They have their own materials that they've already written. They have photos that they're going to randomly give you, graphics that they've come up with, whatever it is, they're going to give you all this stuff. And we want to make sure they're responsible for that stuff. And first, we want to just tell them that it's their intellectual property, that they get to keep it. It's not like you have copyright over that or anything. And then second, they're responsible for that. So if they go get a license for it from some third party, if they randomly downloaded that from Google Images, whatever, you're going to obviously educate them that that's not a good idea. But also if they did that, if they did any of that, that they're the ones taking responsibility for that. Yeah. And so, and also that they're giving you a license to use it in your just normal process of using it. Because one of the things is when you're managing someone's Facebook page, you're going to be taking that photo they gave you, for example, and putting it on Facebook, and you're saying to Facebook as part of the terms of service that you have the rights to do that. So you want them to give you that license so you could do that.
Right. Okay. So, and then that sort of is expanded a little bit here in section 8 too.
Right. So if you're writing, the Facebook post, you're writing the Twitter post, whatever it is that you're doing, then the work that you create, as soon as they pay you the money, then they have rights over that. Then you're giving them the intellectual property rights over that work that you've created.
Great. And then this next section we talk a lot about, and I think it's really important to just take a moment about this one too.
Right. I mean, we're just reiterating, and that you can't guarantee anything. That of course you're going to talk about what you want to achieve with your clients in the sales process and in the marketing of your services, but you can't guarantee anything. You can't guarantee because of their current situation, and market conditions could change, and Google could decide to do things differently, and Facebook could decide to do things differently, et cetera. So just reiterating that in the contract itself.
Okay. And then can you explain this term? This is a legal term that I think a lot of people might not be familiar with, but they understand the concept about warranties and about especially this bit right here.
Right. So what you're doing is that both sides are saying that each person is saying, we represent and warrant that everything we are doing doesn't infringe anybody's trademark or copyright or anything like that for the stuff that we provide. So the stuff that you are doing you're not plagiarizing anybody. You didn't randomly download it from Google Images, whatever it is that you're doing. There's warranting that they didn't do any of that stuff. And then the next paragraph, the indemnification, is you're saying both sides are saying, if I did violate that representation or warranty, that I promise to bail you out, defend you if I didn't live up to it. So for example, let's say your client gives you a photo, they randomly downloaded it off of Google Images, and then you post it on Facebook, and then you're the one who gets the letter from Getty because you were the administrator of the Facebook account. Then you can go to your client and be like, hey, you have to indemnify me and pay Getty the $6,000 that Getty wants. And they have to, because this contract says so. And
beautiful.
So, and that's the idea. And because it's a mutual indemnification, I'm not worried about you guys doing this because you know better. But it's a mutual indemnification. Most people will agree to it because it's both ways.
Yeah.
Right.
Good.
And then this one, I think it's very clear about this particular segment. But the next one is highlighted, and in the document, we actually have some extra text around it, and we'll have some information in the module that contains this. But this highlighted area has some options to it. So can you talk a little bit about this?
Right. Yeah, this is a choice where you have two choices, or you could choose to put neither. And for some people, it may be appropriate to do neither. So you can choose to either have a non-compete agreement, or to have a no exclusivity agreement, or to just not talk about this at all.
Okay.
So the idea is that for some of your clients, they don't want you to be representing anybody else in their industry on social media. And for some of your clients, that might be appropriate, and they might be willing to pay you more money for that. And so for you, that might be worth it for you. And if that's true, you might be willing to agree to that. So if they are paying you more money and you're willing to agree to that, you might be willing to put in this non-compete clause. And there's a couple little options in there, because you would decide how many months you would agree to this. So would it just be during the term of this agreement that you wouldn't represent anybody else in the same industry? Would it be for the term of this agreement plus 3 months, plus 12 months, plus 36 months? You wouldn't go any longer than 3 years, because that wouldn't actually be valid in pretty much any state. And then what you would need to define the industry and the location. So for some clients, they would only care about like their particular industry in their particular state, because maybe they're a local business who really only is focusing on their local industry. But for some clients, they market all over the world, so they would want to only have you be representing them all over the world in their industry. Now on the flip side, there's the no exclusivity clause, where you are expressly saying, I can represent anybody, including your express competitors. So if the power's on the opposite side. So I have some of my clients who will put out clauses similar to this, where because they want to expressly say, I can represent anybody. I've had this for some of my clients who are like website designers, for example. And this is if you expressly want to say, I can represent anyone. Now, if you don't have this clause, it doesn't mean that you can't expressly represent anyone. Typically, when we have that in there, it's more just to keep people informed, to let people know that you can. It's more of an education clause than something that is, if you don't have it in
mandatory.
there.
Yeah. So you can, so basically this little paragraph here, you can pick one of those two options, or just delete it completely and renumber the rest of the options there.
Yeah.
So it's really up to you. And, a lot of times we're teaching people to specialize in an area. So it does, but there are people who are like, well, I don't want you to represent my jewelry store, competitor in the same town. Right. And then maybe you can put that in there.
Right. And I've even had clients where it does that. I was like, I don't want you to represent that guy.
Yeah.
And that may be reasonable. And the thing is,
sure,
you were never going to represent that guy. It would be bizarre, right? So if they need it in the contract and that's going to make the deal for you, okay, you know, put it in the contract. That makes the deal for you. You weren't going to do it anyway. And that works. So it's good to have the language. So you have that option to put it in there. Now, one thing, and I put this in the side note, is non-compete agreements are not enforceable in every jurisdiction, in every area, in every state. And even in the places where they are, they're only enforceable to, like, they can't be super broad. And so you can't say you can't work for anybody anywhere in this entire United
pizza.
States. So it needs you, it's not going to work unless you have it be for a certain number of months in a certain industry. So
great. Okay,
you need to have it be logical.
Yeah.
So that's super. And in the next section on 14, I think one of the most important sentences is right here. Because a lot of times, the client will say, well, it sounds like you're working for me as an employee, whereas in fact, they're not an employee. They're a consultant or a manager. And so this is an important line, I think, to pull out.
Yeah, and it protects both sides, and it's good to define the relationship, and really it protects your client. I mean, they should want this in there. So it's important for them to not have you be an employee, so they're not liable to pay payroll taxes on your behalf.
Yeah.
So this is a good paragraph to define what the relationship is.
Great.
My favorite one is this, because long ago and far away, I used to be a performer, and I had this in my performance contract. But back then, we didn't have hacker attacks and widespread internet outages, which we sort of had to add to this one, didn't we?
Yeah, finding out new language because we used to not have to put terrorism in there.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And there's been cases. Well, since 9/11 there was payments not paid out on 9/11 because that wasn't a war. So yeah, this clause is really about all the things that could happen that wouldn't be your fault. And if Facebook goes down, as the example, it's not your fault that Facebook went down, or if, remember, we all know all the times where, the DNS systems go down and then half the internet in the United States is down and you can't do anything, and it's not your fault that you can't access the internet because nobody in the, 11 states of your area can access the internet. Now, this doesn't include, if your personal house doesn't work, you kind of do have the responsibility to go to Starbucks. But the idea of this is widespread.
Yeah.
Some widespread problem is happening.
So I think the rest, I don't know if there's anything else we need to kind of address.
One more.
Oh, yeah. And then I have a couple other questions too that I just want to.
So these are pretty straightforward. I think everybody can understand them, but we do have another one of these sections that has options. So can we talk about this one real quick?
Yeah, the last section that has an option is about choice of law, and this is a very legal kind of legalese kind of clause. But the reason I give you guys a choice is because some of you may have clients who are local to you, and if you have clients who are local to you, then I recommend using the choice of law and form, the first paragraph choice, where you're actually picking your local county and state if you had any disputes, because then you could utilize your local small claims court if you had any disputes with people. Small claims court is very inexpensive, and so if you're representing the local brick and mortar down the street or someone who happens to be in town, you can just go to small claims court to enforce your agreement. But if you're representing somebody who is far away, then using arbitration is going to be a much better idea. You do have to pay for arbitration. So it's important to understand that if you have to file an arbitration, it's something that requires money out of your pocket to do. But you're not going to go have to file a lawsuit, which is much more expensive to do. So generally speaking, if you have a local person, use your choice of law and form, the first paragraph. And if you have someone far out of town, choice of law and arbitration paragraph.
Super. And then obviously where everybody signs, but we just want to go down to this last bit here. Oops, come and work for me. And that's this proposal. This is where you put in that proposal that we talked about earlier that you've already probably gotten okayed and are ready to sign contracts. So that's what is really important. All the fees are put in here. All of this really should be in the proposal. So it's not that you have to necessarily fill all this out, but this gives you some guidelines of how to put it in the proposal.
Yeah, that's good.
Right. Yeah, this is just a bunch of examples of language that you can use. So you have a bunch of options.
Yeah.
Great.
Good.
All right.
So I have a couple questions just on to wrap up. Just this is what we have a lot of students who are worldwide. You know, how does this contract kind of affect? I mean, you have to really know your local laws, right? But can you use this as a kind of a starting point?
Yeah, I mean, it's, it depends on where you are and where your clients are. And you can always choose to do business and have a contract that is, you can choose the law of any place and choose the form of any place for a contract. So for example, let's say you're in country A and you have a client who's in country B. You could choose the law of the state of New York, and in the international arbitration, and have that be what you're doing this contract under.
Okay.
Big companies do that.
Interesting.
Because I mean, how else were they going to do it, right? Like, because you have to pick somewhere, and so a lot of times that's really what makes sense. And then that's one of the reasons that arbitration exists, because logistically, the arbitration started for really big companies because there was no other way to do it. Yeah. So and I actually specifically say New York law because a lot of big companies use the law of the state of New York. It's a very well documented contract law. So if you have no idea what law to pick and you're like all over the place and you're not tied to any particular state, New York is a good choice for kind of a neutral place. It is for your choice of law. So that can be a good solution when, especially, and also I do that with my clients who move a lot. So I have a lot of clients who travel internationally or kind of live nowhere and will pick New York as their choice of law. Yeah.
And I think we also need to make the point that if someone comes in here and significantly changes this contract, they really need to have it reviewed by a lawyer before they put it into play. Wouldn't you say that would be a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, you could accidentally do things that make your contract not coherent, where you create things that don't work with each other. And I've seen that where, people will start adding things or they'll take out things and all of a sudden there's inconsistencies in the agreement. So if you just, if you change something from 10 days to 20 days or whatever, that's no big deal. That's just customizing stuff. But if you really do need to change fundamentally how different clauses work and you need to structure something differently because of how you do business. And also if you want to modify this because you are in Canada and you have all your clients in Canada, then take this to your lawyer in Canada and have them modify it for what works under Canadian law.
Great. And then where can people find you and work with you if they want to, more help with law and, making sure that their contracts and terms and everything is all in place correctly?
Right. So if you go to elizabethpw.com, that'll take you to my website and you don't have to remember how to spell my name. And I'm also Elizabeth PW on Twitter and Facebook and everything. So I help people with contracts and I also do trademark work and form LLCs and corporations and all that kind of stuff. So, and I can even help you modify this agreement, which will be a really efficient way to work with me. So, and I also do quick calls, which are a great way to just get a small amount of advice. It's 15 minutes for $100. So it's a real great way to just get 1 or 2 legal questions out of the way.
Awesome. Great.
Thank you so
thank
much.
you so much. This has been great. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah, you're welcome.